Listeners, there are seasons in life when the old version of us quietly stops working. The roles, routines, and identities that once made sense begin to feel heavy, almost foreign. And in those moments, we often panic, trying to fix what feels broken and what not. But what if nothing is broken at all? What if life is simply asking us to listen, to release, and to stop and, realize what you're doing and step into what's next with trust? Welcome to the Divine Decode podcast, a space where we slow down and explore the deeper meaning behind life's turning points, inner shifts, and soul level invitations. I am your host, Pragya, and today's conversation is one many of us are living through, even if we don't yet have the language for it, but we're all living in that confusion. I am joined by Dr. Jessie and Omar over here, who are the founders of A Soul's Quest. Together, they've walked through profound personal and spiritual transitions, moments of uncertainty, unlearning, and realignment, and have guided many others through similar thresholds. We learn about them, and I'm so sure that you will get so much to resonate on today. And today we are talking about transitions through life, not as problems to solve, but as sacred passages that reshape who we are becoming. And I'm so sorry I spoke a lot, but welcome on the show, Dr. Jessie and Omar. And it's such a pleasure to host you today.
Thank you so much for having us. It's a pleasure to be here. We're excited.
Yeah, that was an amazing introduction too. I love the setup. So this was awesome. Thank you so much for your kindness and everything and inviting us here.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. And as we move with it, I gave what you do and what all are your aspects of doing life as of now. So to start with, I want to know that when you look back now to your life, your moments, can you recall a moment, not necessarily dramatic, but quietly undeniable, when you realize that something in my life is changing and I can't keep living the same way anymore, and you realized patterns that, oh, this is something that I don't want to be known as, or this isn't somewhere I want to live. So yeah, what was that moment and how was that realization?
That's a very good question, actually. For me, it really was a very subtle nudge in my life. It was me just, you mentioned patterns, right? I started to know or recognize that I was going through these patterns that, of people pleasing, of giving, of not establishing boundaries, of not being able to say no. And those things were really starting to weigh on me and feeling very heavy in my life. And I worked for 15 years in higher education. I was very loyal. Again, people pleasing, not saying no, no boundaries, and went through the motions of getting my degrees, getting a terminal degree, thinking that my loyalty would be rewarded, and that didn't happen. And so, after 15 years, I decided to exit the organization thinking that that threat of I'm going to quit, I'm looking for another job would lead them to, okay, we realize we're going to lose something valuable. So let's give her what she's asking for. But that didn't happen. And so I ended up leaving and going to another organization. And that didn't work out. Very toxic for me, and just not being able to um, I just didn't fit in there, and a lot of that had to do with a lot of the shifts that I was going through subconsciously. And so the shift for me, like I said, was very subtle. It was just a day in and day out, like a nug, like that nagging feeling in your body that just something just doesn't feel right. I was feeling a lot of anxiety, depression, asking, "What am I doing? What's my purpose? I have this degree, and what am I going to do with it? And I don't feel like I'm living the life I'm supposed to be living." And just asking that question of who am I? And that was really the pattern that I was experiencing, is like, what am I doing? Who am I? What am I doing? Who am I? And that was the turning point for myself. I don't know about
Yeah,
that.
for me, it's happened a few times in my life, and it's interesting how those moments were like certain punctuations in which I kind of like realize there's something that's changing. I don't know what it is, and typically what happens or what happened for me was that it drove me into depression, confusion, and 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 even thoughts of not being here, thoughts of suicide. And I'll be quite honest with that. The first time that I experienced these transitions happened when I was in university, in college, in my junior year, and I went through a big transformation at that time. And that was the first time that I came to really begin to investigate a lot of spiritual, mythological, and psychological concepts and how those things apply to my life. And then it happened again in my early 40s. And that came as a transition when it came to my career and what I thought was my purpose and what I thought was what I was meant to do in life. But the difference between those two transitions periods in my life was in the second period, I was able to look for common denominators. What is it that is happening now that was similar to what happened when I was younger? And what are the things that I could learn from that, but also be able to share with other people as to what these feelings, what these transitions, what these emotions, what the despair, the confusion, what does it all mean? And what I came to the conclusion was this is an unfoldment in your life, right? We always look at life like very linear. You know, you start here and you're going to end somewhere. And then when you get there, you get to another place. But life doesn't work in a straight line, it works more in spirals. And our life are cyclical in nature. And we learn this from religions like Hinduism and other religions that talk about the cycles of life. And those cycles in the big macro also happens within us as individuals. And the reason why there's friction and the reason why there's conflict from what we've come to understand is because we don't see our lives in the cyclical manner also. We see our lives as a straight line. And that's what happens. So what we try to do with what we teach, both from the individual perspective, but also from the organizational perspective, is this idea of how our lives develop in a spiral. In our way, we call it a PEP framework: perspective, experience, and philosophy. So, perspective is when we're born into the world, we are giving a certain perspective by our culture, where we are born, the time and place where we are born. We are given that information to survive at that point, and we experience life from that point of view. Then these transitions happen, which break away some of those things that were given to us. And that gives us the opportunity to go forward with a different perspective, with a different philosophy as to how we are going to approach life. And when we understand this much better and have clarity, those feelings of depression and confusion begin to dissipate. And then you can start looking at your life in a more proactive way, more of unfolding rather than arriving somewhere. And those are the things that we teach. And those came from the lessons that we learned in life.
Beautiful lessons and beautifully spoken. Because I feel, both of you, you've seen it in ways which is, which is common, right? Like a lot of people, they feel it. They feel that, okay, as Dr. Jessie said, that I wasn't feeling valued over a place. And that is when I decided to move on. And as you also, Omar, you said that you were at a place and a phase in life in your university wherein, you did not feel belonged or yourself at that point. And those are the feelings that we feel it, right? We know it. And these are the feelings that aren't to be ignored, living in that bubble, living in that loophole, always. That is when the destruction happens. And I'm so glad that you, brought up your story with it, because it's inspirational. And I hope the listeners, they resonate with it and get the idea that it's always better to look at life in a very subjective manner, as you said, Omar, that it's not linear. It's not literally just one line that you will walk on, and there are so many situations, and you can't even anticipate this would come up to you and for you, and it might be something very good, and it might also be something which is not so good for you. So yeah, thank you for taking us through that.
No, and not a problem at all. And again, it's this stuff. It's really, I love the word subjectively, right? When you look at something, you have to look at it from the standpoint of what is it really meaning? What is it really saying? We look at our spirituality and our religions and things like that as something that is fact, right? But it's mostly it needs to be more experiential. You need to be able to understand cyclical nature of life, which again, if you look at any religion, that cycle, it's constantly there. In Hinduism, you talk about the yugas. This happens in the big picture. When you look at psychology, someone like Eric Erickson, who quick pinpoints specific points in our lives in which the friction of transitioning takes place. And we have to understand that. We have to be able to really look at it from the standpoint that this is normal. you know, it's normal to feel these things, right? And I'm gonna give it over to Jessie so she could talk about one of our concepts about, the spiritual dashboard, the dashboard of what emotions really are. So I'm just gonna pass it over to you so you could explain that all these feelings they have a meaning and they have a purpose, but it's not what we think.
It's interesting that thank you, Omar. That when I don't remember if it was you or if it was Omar that said this, but it's that we end up sitting in this loophole, right? Of or the hamster wheel of being in this cycle of um unhappiness, right? Depression, sadness. And a lot of the things that happen to us, we feel them, and oftentimes because of societal pressure or because of expectations that are put on us, we don't turn inward to try to figure out what is this feeling? What's going on with me? Why am I feeling this way, right? Oftentimes we look at it like, what's wrong with me? I'm defective. I'm not why I shouldn't be depressed. I shouldn't be unhappy. I shouldn't be feeling anxious. And like Omar said, those are normal feelings. And I think what happens is when we ignore those, it's like you said, we end up staying in this loophole and further, um, the word that you used, I don't remember, but further enforcing this life of unhappiness, right? Of not living from our true essence. So the dashboard that Omar is talking about is we have this we talk about core drives in the in our curriculum and the things that we have developed. And the core drives, I'm not going to name all of them, but they're what drive us to be motivated to get out of bed, right? And when you understand those core drives, that's when you can live from this authentic, from your essence and be that creative individual and live with happiness. The dashboard that Omar is talking about is take, for example, you're a car, right? A car doesn't move without an engine, right? So the engine is the core drives. There's 8 core drives that we discuss, that we teach on. And when those core drives are not in balance, what happens is it signals to the dashboard of the car, uh-oh, something's wrong with the engine, right? And oftentimes what typically happens, and I'm guilty, is we see the check engine light come on, and we like for me, I have a little picture of my granddaughter and I move it over and I say, "Okay, this is not I'm not going to deal with this today. I'm not going to address this drive, right?" And that's the issue, and that's what I was alluding to earlier, is that we don't confront these feelings. We don't explore what is going on within ourselves and question ourselves. We don't engage with that because we don't want to. It's the icky part of the stuff that we don't want to deal with, right? And that is what that dashboard is. I'm trying to say this very quickly because we don't have a lot of time, but a lot of the times that's what happens is we ignore these these feelings and we don't answer those questions, or we don't take the time to turn inward to try to discover what it is that's going on within us. And that is when people turn into, like Omar said, depression, society, or suicide, things like that.
Yeah, and one of the things is that this idea of the core drives, so they're natural desires that we have. The desire for recognition, the desire for power. And again, power, it's not about just having power over somebody else. Power really is that idea of being self-autonomous, to be able to decide what our future is, what our life is going to look like. So we have to start really looking at these things not as positives or negatives, right? Which is typically when we hear the word desire is something like that. It's about understanding, what as a human being do I really want? You know, do I want to be autonomous? Do I want to have the faculty and the decision making to live the life that I want, how I see it, how I would like to be? So when we started looking at these drives and this idea of emotion signaling to us, hey, you need to look at the reasons why you're doing something. Is it because you want recognition? And if you want recognition, what are you willing to pay for that? Because recognition might be at the expense of your own life. It might be because you want to be recognized by a society that you don't feel you want to be a part of. And how does that look like? And how does that friction look like? So the more you understand these concepts, the more you understand that you are uniquely you, and that our lives unfold in a certain time and place, and these frictions are just a signal to let you know, for you to define how that life, your life, manifests in the here and now. Those are important skills to recognize and understand.
So true, so true. And I love how you said all of it is natural, nothing is made up. You don't wake up that one day, that, oh, today I want to feel this way. It's
No.
literally, yeah, it's literally coming from your experiences, from, within that, okay, there is some, you know, balance required now. And as you spoke about balance, and how beautifully you've explained it with the cars example, I love it. And thank you for taking us through that journey too. And for somebody who is actually stuck in this thought that, okay, I need some balance in life, and somebody who is listening right now who feels stuck in that in between, wanting clarity but also feeling suspended, feeling like a failure, or in the worst thoughts, what is a grounded way to move through a transition without trying to rush, control, or prematurely define it, or take steps in a very haphazard way? So what would your suggestion be for them?
So, there's a number of ways that you can do that, right? Obviously, if you start to feel this uncomfortable, I don't belong, or who am I? What's going on? I don't feel good. Um, I encourage people to reach out to other people for support. Um, you turn inward, take moments to journal, to explore what's going on. I think that's the thing that we don't do, is take the time to sit with ourselves to discover what is this feeling that I'm feeling. And oftentimes when we're able to sit and write these things down and just get it all out, you start to sort of the clouds start to dissipate, right? But we also offer a number of services to people to help guide them through these transitions, if you will. And so if anybody is interested, we are offering a coherence masterclass that starts the first week in February. And we talk about a lot of the things that we touched on today, and we go deeper. We take a deeper dive into this to help guide individuals through these transitions. And people can find out more about it at asqempowerment.com. But yeah, some of the practical things that people can do is like, I'm giving you my own what I did. I did a lot of journaling and a lot of exploring of, why am I feeling this way? A lot of crying, a lot of fetal position, crying. What about you?
Yeah, for me, it starts with this one simple question: who am I? Because that is a foundational a lot of philosophy, religions, and everything else. And it's an important question because we think we know the answer to that, right? If you sit down, like Jesse said, with a journal in a quiet place by yourself, and you simply contemplate on that question, who am I? Right? It begins to open something inside of you because again, in the reality of all we know thus far from science, philosophy, religions, mythology, there never was, there isn't, and there will never will be anybody else like you ever, right? There will never be a duplicate of you anywhere, right? So when you start contemplating the uniqueness of that question, who am I, in the scope of everything, right? It allows you the opportunity to begin to explore, which is something that our society does very well at removing from us, you know, through institutions, instruction. Not that it's good or bad, it's just that in order to maintain structure in society, in the world, and you need those type of things. So it's not that it's bad. It's just when you come to these transitions, it shows you that it no longer serves you. So the first question is that who am I? In the big scheme of the universe, I am the only one that exists with this body, with this mentality, with this consciousness. Explore that. See where those answers take you. And take the time every day to sit quietly in a room by yourself, thinking about the answers to that question. And you'll see what happens. For me, that was the exploration that led us to kind of like create what we're creating right now and finding our point of expression, which is something that we always are asking people to explore and look for.
That is beautiful because I can tell you that I started doing that, questioning how I'm feeling and why am I feeling that, instead of jumping on finding out solutions for it. That is when it helped. The awareness does it for you. Not jumping onto solutions and just sitting with you, having some time for yourself. You don't necessarily have to change everything in a day. It is a
No.
process, it takes time, and it's life. You can't put life in a box.
No.
It's not it's not something that you open one day and you're like, okay, now I'll fix this and then I'll again keep it in a box. That is yeah. And that's beautiful how you shared your transition and better ways to deal with it, because a lot of times we just want solution to it. And I'm talking this out of experience. We Gen Zs, we are in a rush to have the solution for everything. We would run to chat GPT for solutions at this point for our lives. And 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 that is where we need to stop. And I feel this podcast, it reaches out. When it reaches out to people, it resonates with them this way, letting them know that okay, it's okay to be there sometimes. And yeah, it's always good to also transition, but it takes time. It's not a one day process. So thank you for that. And with that, thank you, Dr. Jessie and Umar, for sharing your wisdom with such honesty and depth. And to everybody who is listening, if you are standing at the edge of a transition, unsure of what comes next, trust this. What feels like an ending may actually be a divine invitation into deeper alignment. And it's not just me who is saying that. You've heard Dr. Jessie and Omar also sing that today, and I hope you resonate with that. And I am Pragya, and this has been the Divine Decode podcast. Join me again as we continue uncovering the meaning woven into our lives. Until next time, stay gentle, stay present, and stay open to who you're becoming.